Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars. I'm Robert Litvak, Senior Vice President of the Center. The Wilson Center this year is celebrating our 50th anniversary, and we're hosting a variety of events to mark that occasion, which also marks the centenary of other major events such as the independence of Czechoslovakia. So it's a particular pleasure to host today's Freedom Lecture with His Excellency Mikuláš Dzurinda, the former Prime Minister of Slovakia. The Wilson Center is a public-private partnership, an institution created by an act of Congress, and it serves as this country's official memorial to our 28th president. We tackle global issues through independent research, open dialogue, and actionable ideas. As our president, Jane Harman, who unfortunately cannot be with us today, likes to put it, we provide safe political space for addressing key public policy issues. We're delighted, as I said, to once again host the Czech and Slovak Freedom Lecture, which commemorates the inspiring struggle for freedom by the Czech and Slovak peoples. This lecture is sponsored by the Friends of Slovakia, the American Friends of the Czech Republic, and by the Embassy of the Czech Republic and the Embassy of Slovakia. I would like to recognize and thank the ambassadors of Slovakia to the United States, Ivan Korsuk, as well as the ambassador of the Czech Republic to the United States, Heine Komonicek. Both are here with us today. Welcome back to the Wilson Center. I'm also pleased to welcome Tom Dine, former president of Radio Free Europe and current president of the American Friends of the Czech Republic, Phil Kasich, the executive vice president of the American Friends of the Czech Republic, Ted Russell, former U.S. ambassador to Slovakia and founding chairman of Friends of Slovakia. Thanks to all of you for your work to support this program. Over the last 18 years, this lecture series has given the Wilson Center and its Global Europe program the privilege of hosting, among others, Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, the Solidarity leader and prominent newspaper editor Adam Michnik, former Czech president Václav Klaus, and former ambassador Michael Zantovsky. Our speaker today, former Prime Minister Dzurinda, is president of the Wilfried Martens Center for European Studies, the official think tank of the European People's Party based in Brussels. He served as Prime Minister of Slovakia from 1998 to 2006 and has held various positions in government since first entering politics in 1990. Once he became Prime Minister and formed a coalition government in 1998, Dzurinda introduced far-reaching reforms which enabled Slovakia to begin the process of joining the European Union and NATO. And after being re-elected in 2002, he led Slovakia to become a member of the European Union and NATO in 2004, a process which he actively took part in from the beginning, as I mentioned. He has broad experience in government. He was foreign minister. He's a founding member of the Slovak Democratic and Christian Union. Interestingly, he's a marathon runner. He ran in New York City after the 9/11 terrorist attacks to honor the victims of that terrorist assault on this country. So it's a particular pleasure to have him at the Wilson Center today, and the topic of his lecture, which could not be more appropriate, is Miracles in the Heart of Europe. So he will give the opening remarks. We'll have time for questions from the floor, and then we'll conclude the session with the presentation of the award to him. So with that, Mr. Prime Minister, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President, for your kind words and for having me here in this beautiful house. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, let me please begin by extending my warm thanks to the Friends of Slovakia for the invitation to deliver the 2018 Czech and Slovak Freedom Lecture here in this house in the Woodrow Wilson Center in Washington. My special thanks go to Mr. Theodore Russell, the founding chairman of the Friends of Slovakia and the first ambassador of this country, of the United States, to my home. I also want to greet all of you, the friends of Slovakia, but also the friends of the Czech Republic in the United States. Our today's theme is Slovakia, but in a wider context, as we celebrate not only 25 years of our independence, the independence of the Czech Republic, but also 100 years since our common state, Czechoslovak Republic, had been created. During my years in politics, I quite often appeared in this country, in the United States, side by side with the Czech political representatives. Thus, during a NATO summit, I was invited by President Havel to attend a gala dinner, a gala evening dedicated to the Czech diaspora. Together with Miloš Zeman, as the then Czech Prime Minister, we commemorated the 10th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall in the White House, being invited by President Clinton at that time. Our embassies organized numerous joint events, especially thanks to excellent cooperation of our ambassadors at the time, Martin Butora from our side and Alexander Vondra from the Czech side. So I am very happy, and I want to greet also the current ambassadors to the United States, Ivan Korčok and Hinek Kmoníček. I wish you all the best, gentlemen, even though the quality bar has been set pretty high. Remembering those events and the road that our two nations traveled during the last 100 years evokes pleasant and, I have to admit, very intense emotions. Ladies and gentlemen, April 21st, 1990 was an exceptional day for the Prague. Czechoslovak President Václav Havel greeted Pope John Paul II with these words, quotation, "I am not sure that I know what a miracle is. In spite of this, I dare to say that at this moment, I am participating in a miracle. The man who 6 months ago was arrested as an enemy of the state stays here today as the president of that state and bids welcome to the first pontiff in the history of the Catholic Church to set foot in this land." End of the quotation. Dear friends, when I look back at the road that the Slovaks, but also the Czechs, traveled over the past 100 years, I am tempted to use the words of Václav Havel. I am not sure that I know what a miracle is. Having said that, I dare to say that what we, the Czechs and the Slovaks, have overcome and achieved on this road is a real miracle. Despite the consequences of the World War I, despite all the growing pains of the young post-war Czechoslovak Republic, despite all the indignities we suffered in the World War II, despite the horrors of fascism and communism, despite brutal normalization following the 1968 invasion, despite the difficulties of the transformation period after the Velvet Revolution, despite the dissolution of the common state and creation of independent Slovak and Czech Republic, despite all of that, here we are today, the Slovaks and the Czechs, equal, fully emancipated members of NATO, the EU, and of the entire developed international democratic society. Slovakia and the Czech Republic are open countries with rising living standards of their citizens. Our countries enjoy the respect of the world around us. Among other things, we earn this respect by having successfully mastered the task of presiding over the European Union and by developing regional cooperation in the format of Visegrad 4. By sharing our experience on accession and reform processes with such countries as Croatia, the countries of Western Balkans, or Ukraine. Slovakia and the Czech Republic enjoyed the respect of the international community, also because we have continued to mutually help one another, even after our common state fell apart. I even have the impression that today's relations between the Slovaks and the Czechs are better than they have ever been in our history. By the way, after the last elections, as you may know, the Czechs even choose a Slovak as their prime minister. Just say, is it not a real miracle? I admit that we have not always walked side by side at the same pace or in the same direction. On the Slovak side, we have caused our road to be somewhat bumpy. This was especially true of the period that followed the demise of Czechoslovakia. While the Czechs pursued reforms, modernization, transformation, Slovakia was on the verge of a relapse. So much that Madeleine Albright called Slovakia a black hole of Europe. It was in summer 1997. While the Czech Republic, Hungary, and Poland joined NATO in 1999, Slovakia was excluded from integration processes. Shortly after successful 1998 election, just around the time when our neighbors were being admitted to NATO, I paid my first visit to the US president. As the meeting drew to a close, I appealed to President Clinton to give Slovakia another chance. President Clinton's answer was that we missed the train and that we stayed alone. I argued that NATO membership was also sought by the Baltic states, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia. The president replied, Russia would never allow it. But 5 years later, on March 29, 2004, Slovakia entered NATO together with the Baltic states, together with Slovenia, Romania, Bulgaria. And I had the honor to deliver an address on behalf of the new member states, standing on the White House lawn next to President Bush. Tell me, wasn't that a miracle? Yes, after the 1998 elections, Slovakia embarked on a difficult reform path. The demise of the communist bloc and of the Soviet Union led also to the collapse of Slovakia's huge arms industry. Mines were being closed down, and the big steel works in the eastern part of the country, in Košice, employing over 20,000 people, was facing bankruptcy. At its peak, the unemployment rate climbed to 20%, and in some regions, to as high as 30%. Our foreign exchange reserves were close to zero. Before the 1998 elections, our finance minister was borrowing money at a 28% interest. Slovakia suffered from a democratic deficit, the raging of mafia, the lack of foreign investment. In short, it was economically devastated. However, not later than after 5 years of painful but exceptionally successful reforms, I was reading in New York Times, it was in December 2004, about Slovakia as the economic tiger of Europe. The American US Steel Corporation turned the Slovak Steel Works into the most advanced facility of the company. Slovakia makes no tanks anymore, but it is the largest per capita manufacturer of passenger cars in the world. The unemployment rate today in my home is less than 6%. Isn't that a miracle? Ladies and gentlemen, the Slovaks and the Czechs have a reason to be proud. In particular, we can be proud of our resilience and endurance, but also of the faith that helped us get through the most difficult moments. We had great political personalities in our history, such as President Masaryk and Havel on one side, and Stefanik and Hoxha on the other side. Moreover, we are able to draw support from such spiritual figures as Cardinals Beran and Tomášek on the one side, and Cardinal Korec or Bishop Gojdic on the other. It was also thanks to these people that we dared dreaming. When President George Bush Sr. visited Prague on November 17, 1990, just 1 year after the Velvet Revolution, I was moved. I was very touched. But I was also a little sad, because his trip didn't include Bratislava. Although I barely touched politics at the time, I remember that I hoped to see an American president one day also in Slovakia. It still seems like a dream. Less than 15 years after his father's visit to Prague as President of the United States, Bratislava saw the visit of President George Walker Bush. We remember Scott very, very emotionally. As Slovak Prime Minister at the time, I welcomed him before a packed Hviezdoslav Square in Bratislava. Wasn't that a miracle? My dear friends, I mentioned these amazing stories of our recent common history, not to cover up our defeats or our failures. You can read many different things in these days related to the Czech Republic, related to Slovakia. Neither do I mention them out of mere nostalgia. I do it especially for encouragement and as a source of inspiration and strength for future struggles and challenges we are facing in these times. I mentioned these great milestones of our history also to make us fully realize today, 100 years from the birth of Czechoslovakia, how forward-looking and right were Masaryk, Beneš, Kramář, Švehla, Štefánik, Hlinka, Hoxha, Šrobár, and their contemporaries in their struggle to establish a Czechoslovak state. I will put it simply and directly. The birth of the Czechoslovak state was a blessing, especially for us, the Slovaks. I am neither a historian nor an ethnographer. I am neither a sociologist nor an anthropologist. As it has already been said, I am just a runner. I thus dare to say that only a few nations had been able to run so fast on their historical path to develop so dynamically as we, the Slovaks, had been able during the past 100 years. The pivotal role in this development has been played by our coexistence with the Czechs under both the Czechoslovak and the European roof. It is my great wish that we in Slovakia draw inspiration from this significant anniversary and take a step that should have been taken long ago, and that must be taken. Declare October 28 as a permanent, lasting state holiday also in the Slovak Republic. Dear friends, the founding fathers of the Czechoslovak statehood had a vision that inspired them in their struggle to achieve that statehood. They had faith in the values on which that statehood was based. They had a plan on developing that statehood. They also had the will to implement that plan. And they had the moral qualities, thanks to which they were ready to bring sacrifices for implementing their plan. Our history and our present bear witness to it. Our two nations live today in a united Europe. The euphoria over a major expansion of NATO and of the EU was followed by the shock of unprecedented global financial and economic crisis. Then in 2015, we were caught off guard by a massive immigration wave. For the first time since its inception, the EU is losing one of its member states, the United Kingdom, even though it seems to me that there is a big chance to achieve an orderly withdrawal agreement, which would be the base case under these circumstances. But anyway, the term enlargement gave way to term Brexit. Since 2001, we have faced large-scale international terrorism. Syria is suffering unparalleled hardships. A certain segment of the political elite in both the EU and in the United States questions the principles and perspective of liberal democracy. Russia has annexed the Crimea, destabilized Donbass, and launched a misinformation propaganda war of global dimensions. Russia has set in motion a new Cold War. And as if this were not enough, the cracks that no one would have expected started to appear in the relations between the staunchest allies, the European Union and the United States. No issue is therefore more topical or paramount today than the issue of the vision of the future of the transatlantic community. That's the case. Naturally interesting, although not always positive things are happening also, as I have already a bit indicated, in our homes, in Slovakia, in the Czech Republic. But the decisive role for us in Slovakia and in the Czech Republic is and will be played by the European project and the project of the Transatlantic Alliance. Both sides, the EU and the US, have been taken off guard by the developments of recent years. We are asking, why do people turn away from the mainstream parties? Why are populism, cynicism, and egoism on the rise? Why? It seems to me that the key problem lies in the failures of political elites of recent years. Instead of launching much needed reforms, political elites are increasingly resorting to making unrealistic promises. They do so because the reforms are almost always painful in the short run, while unrealistic promises bring immediate political gains. This is why we are witnessing the rise of the over-promising but under-delivering policy on both sides of the Atlantic. But people feel that it is becoming harder and harder to repay mortgages, that the real income, especially that of middle class, of a young working families, fails to mirror the reported figures of global economic growth. The millennial generation shows more anxiety than optimism. And the parents of these young people are less and less confident that their children will succeed. If we add to this the fear of globalization and rapid technological development, the fear of uncontrolled migration, and the unwavering political correctness of the mainstream media, then it might be possible to comprehend the phenomena of our times: populism, revolt, and anti-establishment. A logical question thus arises: what is the way out? I don't think the answer can be found in economic textbooks or in security manuals, or in the introduction of new tariffs, or in building protection fences around our countries. And it certainly cannot be found by relying on America to resolve all the problems of the world, while the rest us would either graciously allow it to do so in a better case, or criticize it for doing so in the worst case. We are champions in Europe in doing this. In my opinion, the way out is to return to well-tested universal values and ethics. Such return is needed in politics, let's be frank, in media, in public life, as well as in families and in our personal lives. Ladies and gentlemen, the main challenge we are facing today in Europe is to restore unity within our own family, within the EU, and to assume great responsibility for not only our prosperity, but also our security. The EU needs more mutual cooperation, but also more internal competition. The principle of subsidiarity is delegating and managing the competencies should not be only declared, but actually applied. It is necessary to limit the space of maneuver for those national leaders who often shift responsibility for their failures to European institutions. I believe that the time is ripe for meaningful European federalism. The United States could serve as an inspiring model for such project. Slovakia and the Czech Republic could seize a chance to become protagonists of such federal European model. We have our own experience with the so-called federal arrangement. This experience shows that a, let's say, federation built or imposed from top to bottom has only a limited chance of sustainability. But the construction of the EU goes in the opposite direction, from bottom to up. This is why we can succeed. At the central level, member states should give the Union exclusive competencies only in 4 areas: foreign policy, security, common currency, and the single market. All the remaining areas should remain under the competence of member states. The president of the EU should be elected by popular vote. The EU would thus be able to not only speak with one voice in foreign policy, but above all, it would be able to make quicker and more effective decisions. The EU has already decided to move towards a European Defense Union. In these days, this is a small revolution in this city because President Macron was the first, the day before yesterday. Angela Merkel repeated the same, that we are going to create common European army. The work on this project must be significantly accelerated so as to make the EU assume more responsibility for its defense and security, especially in relation to its neighborhood. We all know what happens in the East, Ukraine, Russia. We all know what happens in the Middle East. We all know what happens in Africa. The situation in the Western Balkans is also not very stable. So this project must not become an alternative to or be in competition with NATO, just the opposite. It must be implemented as a stronger and more equal pillar of the transatlantic axis. It will have to include European engagement in the countries whose legitimate governments are unable to come to grips with terrorism or which produce the waves of refugees because of their domestic turmoil. This project will contribute to improving the EU-US relations, I am convinced, and to strengthening the transatlantic alliance. The transatlantic alliance has recently experienced problems for which not only we on the European side, are to be blamed. The relationship between the allies have been influenced also by a shift in the basic paradigm on the United States side after the last presidential election. If the America First approach means protectionism, imposition of new tariffs on imported goods unilaterally, retreat from the world outside, thus isolationism, then the shift, by my mind, has not been for the better. Yes, the EU must be ready to accept an increasingly wider responsibility for its own defense and protection, no doubt about that. On the other hand, I can understand the dissatisfaction of the American administration with the US trade balance figures. But this dissatisfaction must be addressed by mutual talks rather than by one-side decisions. Taking unilateral decisions, retreating into one's own shell, cutting off oneself from the world, especially from the EU, is not, by my mind, a sound policy from the geopolitical perspective, and neither is it sound as a matter of principle. Even such great and powerful country as the United States needs friends and allies. And naturally, there can be no stronger and more trustworthy ally to the United States, and we in the EU are. Dear friends, as you already have heard, after September 11 events, I decided, as the then Slovak Prime Minister, to run the New York Marathon. I perceived it as an expression of solidarity of Slovak people with the suffering your country went through on those days. On the eve of the marathon, I visited the fire station at Lower Manhattan. The firefighters of that station worked days and nights to recover what it was still possible to recover. There was a group of firefighters who have just completed their shift, waiting for me at the station. I was greeted by a firefighter with Slovak roots and a Slovak name, Denis Varchola. Denis Varchola. His brother Michael died while on duty, helping the victims of the disaster and putting down the fire on the ground zero. It was to be his last day in the service before retiring. These were truly emotional moments for me. A giant Slovak flag was spread out on the yard of the fire station. Inside the station, the furnishing was modest, but very, very homey. I told the man that it made me feel the same way I felt at a different station, at my railway station. This was in a picturesque Slovak town of Kežmarok, High Tatras, where I once served as a station master. You know, this departure of the train with a rag cap. After I said that, one of the men, a big guy over 6 feet tall, started to speak. He said that in his entire life, he never traveled outside the United States. What's more, he had never been outside of New York City. During his whole life, he believed that he didn't need anybody outside of New York. He was convinced that he can rely on himself in everything, that his firefighter team and New York are all he needs. How deeply I was mistaken, he told me. We need your help, your solidarity. We are very grateful to you for coming and for running for Michael and for the rest of us. September 11 changed this American's perception of life. He realized the meaning and the power of friendship and of alliance. True friendship and alliance are not measured by money, tariffs, number of tanks, or firefighter aircraft. True friendship is measured by concrete actions and loyalty. In good times, but especially in bad times. That was also the reason for me as the then Prime Minister to join the coalition of the willing and support the alliance military intervention against Saddam Hussein in 2003. That was also the reason why we sent Slovak troops to the area, to Iraq. We were not requesting evidence. I was not looking for weapons of mass destructions, no single second. We went there because the United States and the United Kingdom made a momentous decision, and we are their allies. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, we are remembering important anniversaries of Czechoslovak statehood, as well as of the Slovak and the Czech statehood at a complicated time. At the time when the arsenal of nuclear weapons in the world is expanding rather than shrinking, just as the number of frozen conflicts. At a time when many people are feeling violence and are leaving their homes. When millions of people from Africa, Asia, and Latin America want to get rid of poverty. And that's why they are migrating. at the time when the climate change causes major catastrophes, when social media have elevated the freedom to a fake news, as your president likes to say, of El Dorado. Fake news El Dorado. When the fourth industrial revolution threatens replacing human work by robots. When China wants to be a guarantor not only free trade, but also of global peace. When kleptocracy and arrogance of power in Russia not only destroy the country's internal pluralism, but also generate new confrontations. Despite all of that, I remain an optimist. I am an optimist because I believe in the power of human spirit and in goodness. Because I believe where there is a will, there is a way. Because I have trust in universal values with the supreme value of freedom. And I also have trust in the ability of the West to prevail in the global competition. How true was a German friend of mine who said that neither China nor Russia can give their citizens what the West gives its citizens: freedom. The value of freedom lies also in that it allows competition. And competition is what moves individuals and societies, moves them to go forward, moves them to reach higher. Let me thus wish every success to my home, the Slovak Republic, to our Czech brothers, to the EU and the United States, and to our transatlantic community. Many thanks for your patience and attention.
Thank you very much. Excellent talk. We've got time for a few questions. If speakers could please identify themselves and keep their questions short. Anyone like to open or not? You, at the end of your talk, you listed a host of different developments, from geopolitics, rising nationalism, to the new industrial revolution we're in with robotics and artificial intelligence. The time scale of these are different. Some could take. Could you give an assessment of? You were involved in two institutions, bringing Slovakia into them, NATO and the European Union. Give us your short assessment of the status and the health of these organizations under the pressures they're under right now.
Thank you very much for your question. I briefly described the situation in NATO when on one side we are challenged by new US administration, but this is not completely new, that we should go with spending. Making long story short, it is very natural to understand that we have to spend more to go to this 2% of GDP, which has been promised and decided, agreed upon. This is a bit not complicated, but ambiguous. I feel some ambiguity, because from one side we are asked to invest more into defense. On the other side, the reaction of new US administration on our decision to create PESCO in defense, not even common European army, is a bit nervous, I feel. So we have to speak to each other. Yesterday I had fantastic discussion when I tried to explain that we do nothing wrong against NATO, on the contrary. If I remember yesterday on the field of the Hudson Institute, I put a question that if the United States, as a composition of states, this is in the title, United States, as a member of NATO, have its own army, why we, the European Union, also a composition of the states, also a member of NATO, should not be allowed to do the same? I believe that such a policy could or should lead to the situation when Europe is becoming an equally strong second pillar of the transatlantic alliance. So we in the EU are in the beginning of that. It will not be easy because not every member of the EU is happy to invest more into defense, but this is the question of the day. When it comes to EU, the health of our composition is a bit questioned, especially because of immigration. There are countries having more experience with this phenomenon. On the other side, there are countries that are more conservative, I would say. And we didn't begin to answer this phenomenon in 2015 in the best way, trying to impose quota system on the countries. It was the beginning of big misunderstanding. Now we are trying to listen to each other, to understand to each other. If we manage this new challenge, if we are able to unite on the vision of common European defense, I believe then that we can succeed. This is why also with my think tank, we are trying to come up with new vision, how Europe should be developed in the horizon of 2 consecutive election term. It means in the horizon of 2030. There is a big, very open discussion in these days in Europe. We have many difficulties. Look at Italy in these days. Look at Germany with Angela Merkel. Very strong pillar of stability is now shaking herself. So a lot of move, a lot of change, but at the end of the day, our experience says that if we are under pressure in the EU, we are able to act. So let's not only hope, but also work to respond to this new situation.
Thank you. We're coming up on the hour, and so I'd like to invite.
There is a hand, maybe.
Yeah, but we really have to adjourn to make the 1 o'clock adjournment time. So I'm sorry. I'd like to now invite Ted Russell, Joe Senko, and Tom Dine, representing Friends of Slovakia and the American Friends of the Czech Republic, to come up, say a few words to mark this occasion, this annual Czech and Slovak Freedom Lecture, and also to conclude today's proceedings. Thank you. You can use the podium there.
Prime Minister Dzyrinda, on behalf of Friends of Slovakia, I would like to thank you for a wonderfully optimistic and visionary presentation today in a time when there's so much ill will and chaos and worry abroad. It is a pleasure to hear you speak so optimistically, but then that has been you throughout your career. On behalf of Friends of Slovakia, we want to compliment you as being a champion of democratic values, the fight for freedom, and particularly the fight for transatlantic cooperation. So I would like to award you our Medal of Honor, which you will recognize the gentleman on the front, Milan Rostislav Štěpánek, and on the back, the combined symbols of the United States and Slovakia. Thank you, sir, for a wonderful presentation.
Mr. Prime Minister, first of all, it's a great pleasure to meet you again and to hear what you have to say, because I agree with Ted Russell that you gave us a little bit of hope here. We in Washington are not allowed to hope anymore, but we'll get over that, won't we? We of the American Friends of the Czech Republic are focused on bilateral relations between the United States and the Czech Republic, obviously, but also on international order, diplomacy, dialogue, democracy promotion, and multilateral security arrangements. I heard all of those in your address and very happy to hear them. And instead of the focus being this morning on Article 5 of NATO, we are now worrying about the emergence of white supremacists here and abroad, and threatening our open societies. So we need more democratic values in play, and we need more democratic institutional growth to combat those phenomena. You said in your talk, we can be proud of our resilience. Well, I was in Prague during your prime ministership most of the time, and you certainly changed that society and certainly put it on the course of democracy and integration, and I congratulate you for that. And very glad that you're still a marathoner. I used to have in my office a poster of a runner going down this large hill and up this high hill, and it said, "Keep running." And sir, keep running.
Thank you.
So, on behalf of the American Friends of the Czech Republic, one more piece of paper for your walls, a certificate of appreciation awarded to you, and again, thank you. But wait. The real key is in here. So we worked together on this, and this is your year to receive a nice envelope, and may you buy new running shoes.
Many thanks. I didn't expect that, but in this case, I am waiting for another invitation. Many thanks.
That concludes today's event. Thank you all for attending. Have a good day.